Alright, tutorial video. I'd say take two, but this is, well, it's take two. So, what you may not be aware of is I just recorded this whole thing once, and then I realized that I left a window up in front of the screen the entire time I was doing it, and you couldn't see anything that I was doing. So, let's try this again. So, anyways, I did a video yesterday, and I've had a fantastic response. I'd love to thank everybody who gave me feedback on that. It's nice to know that my efforts in this aren't wasted. Anyways, so a few people have come to me, and I've had some conversations about micro voxels and putty voxels, and I came to the realization that while this stuff is obvious to me after playing with it for months on end, it's not obvious to everybody. So I figured I'd take a step back and try and explain some of the important things that you need to know when you start trying to do detail work in Landmark. So that said, I'm going to pull up my web whiteboard, and this time when I'm done with it, I won't forget to take it off the screen. So when it's the most important thing to understand about working with voxels in Landmark is the concept of shared corners. And I mentioned this in my other video, but I'm going to go over it again just because it is absolutely critical to being able to understand what's happening when you're building. So here I'm going to draw two voxels side by side. And I do everything in a 2D plane when drawing these because, well, 3D just makes things complicated. So the important thing to understand is that when we have two voxels side by side, these corners are shared between the two voxels. So if I were to put a large voxel down, standard, normal, everyday voxel, nothing exciting here, folks. And then I were to place a micro voxel beside it, we would hope that it would look like this. But that's not the case, because the voxels in the corner, in between them, need to be shared between the two. So instead, what's going to happen when we put those down is these voxels here, when we place the micro voxel beside it, these voxels here will move to meet the corners of the voxel that we just placed down. So instead, what this will look like is I've got a large voxel and I place a micro voxel beside it. What it will do is it will take those corners that were here and stretch them to meet the corners of that micro voxel. So that's what that voxel will now look like after placing a micro voxel beside it. Hope that makes sense. So again, what it did was it just moved these corners and brought them down to meet the corners of the one that went in beside it. So how that works in terms of micro voxels, it's when we're putting micro voxels side by side. So let's draw two micro voxels, and then right beside it I place another micro voxel. In theory, you would think that would make two floating boxes side by side, but this is impossible because these two corners need to be shared. So when we place the second micro voxel down, what it will do is it will take these two voxels here and stretch them and move them, or those two corners here, stretch them and move them to meet the corners of the voxel that we just placed beside it. So in the end, what this is going to look like is two voxels that look like this. So let's jump in game, and this time I'll remember to take my whiteboard off my screen. We'll jump in game and take a look at how that all works. So if you're unaware, when you add a voxel, you can hold shift and click and use these arrows to move that voxel around. When it's where you want it to be, hit apply. Also, just in case, when you're creating a micro voxel, if you're unaware, place your voxel. Don't have it on the ground. It's important that it's not touching any other voxels at the time that you make it. Select that voxel and use your smooth tool on it. Now, if you use your smooth tool, you'll notice it will make that voxel smaller. And you'll see that it jumped down very quickly and it got smaller very quickly. You should also be aware that if you hold control while you're using your smooth tool, it will do it in much smaller increments. So that's how you make a micro voxel. Interesting. I have some bug that's left these arrows on my screen. Okay, so I'm going to select that, take that micro voxel, and I'm going to copy it and paste it beside that orange one. Sometimes I find it doesn't show me my micro voxel on the screen, which is kind of frustrating because then I don't know what I'm doing. There we go. Yep, that's the right spot. So, as I said, you'll notice that when I place a voxel, the voxel that I placed retains its shape and size, but it took that voxel that was beside it, and it stretched those corners and moved those corners to meet the corners of the voxel that I just placed down. So that's a little bit of understanding why sometimes when we're placing things, the voxels beside it distort. It's because it is moving its corners to meet the corners of the voxel or item that we just placed down. So similarly, I'm going to do the same thing with just putting down two micro voxels. So if I put down one, I really wish you could see that yellow. Right now it would be a small yellow square that's floating there. And when I paste it, it doesn't leave a gap in between because it's bringing the top corners of the bottom voxel up to meet the one above it. And just to show that a little bit better, I'm going to paint those two different colors so you can see what happened there. Again, I'll paste one more micro voxel above that, and I'll paste it in yet another color, and you'll see how the red one stretches to meet the corners of the voxel that I placed down. Frustrating that it's not showing me where my voxel is right now. Because now I have to do guesswork. I have to click it, place it, and hope it's in the right spot. I missed. I'll know that I'm on it when I see the voxels beside it stretch to meet it. Boy, am I ever off. So I'll use these arrows, move it, try and get it to where I think it's supposed to be. I look forward to the day but all the bugs and quirks are worked out. There we go. I think that's in the right spot. So if I'm right, I'm going to click the check mark. You'll see a yellow voxel plant here, and the red one stretched to meet it. And there it is. So that's a bit of understanding of microvoxels, how you stretch them, how they react, how one voxel reacts to the one that's beside it. So the next thing to understand is air voxels and what's happening in between. So there's a regular voxel. And I'm going to place a micro voxel beside it, but I'm not going to place it right beside it. I'm going to move it over one extra space. There we go. That looks like it's lined up with the yellow one, so I'm going to move it over 1 and 2. So there we go. So there's two voxels beside each other, but while this air in between, we can't see it, it doesn't mean that it doesn't have a shape, which is kind of interesting. So let's jump back over to the web whiteboard, and I'll try and explain what's happening here. So, here's my first voxel, and then there's voxel space, and then a third one. So, I'll color in the actual voxels that I've placed. So there's one, and I didn't put one here. But what I did do was I put a micro voxel in right here. So the invisible space, the air voxel, still exists, and it's sitting right here. So normally what would happen is if I were to put a voxel in there, what would normally happen, and let's do a bit more drawing. Patience, I don't draw too quickly in here. So there's my first voxel. There's my second voxel. Normally what would happen is, because of shared corners, if I were to add another voxel in between, and let's make it a green voxel. If I were to add another voxel in between, because of the shared corners, what would happen is this here, these two, would move to meet the corners of the voxel that I already put down. So what my end shape would look like that would be my three voxels. That would be their shapes. Sometimes we don't want that to happen. When we've got a voxel here and a voxel over here, and we want to fill in the space in between, We don't want it to be moving corners to meet the voxel that we put in. And that's where putty voxels come in. Because what a putty voxel will do, a putty voxel applies information to the error voxel that's already there. The error voxel has a shape. The putty voxel applies a material to it, so it will fill it in without moving any of the corners around. Now, yes, I'll stop on the web whiteboard there. We'll jump back in game and take a quick look at what's happening. So let's take a look at this in practicality. Let's put two of these side by side. So if I'm placing a regular voxel, and let's place it in blue, and I put it down here in between, because of the shared corners, it grabbed the corners of that green one and stretched it to meet the corners of the voxel that I just put in. With a putty voxel, because a putty voxel doesn't have any information about shape, it doesn't know that it's a square, it will just fill in a space. So let me put down a putty voxel. So you'll notice the putty voxel just filled in that space that already existed there, but it didn't distort any of the voxels beside it. So that's how a putty voxel works, and that's kind of explains a little bit about air voxels. Air voxels do have shape. Even though you can't see them, it doesn't mean that they don't have a shape in the grid of points that exist all around us. So with putty voxels, I suppose at this point, while I had one in my template, it's probably worthwhile taking a moment to show you where to get a putty voxel. Now, putty voxels need to be put together underground. And the reason being is you need healed earth in order to be able to make a putty voxel. So, in order to get a putty voxel, all you need to do is go underground somewhere that you've hollowed out and take a big block and heal it. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one voxel inside this inside this healed earth, and I'm going to paint it. And I have no idea why. I can't explain why healed earth doesn't have shape defined to it, but it doesn't. So now that I've painted that with putty, with a material, I can select it, I can copy it, or I can template it, and at that point I will have a putty voxel that I can use. So where we might want to use this is, here's a good example. I've got this shape that I've already created, and I want to put a voxel inside of it. But I don't want to mess up the X that I already have happening here. So normally, if I take a voxel and I place it in there, it's going to distort the stuff that's around it to meet the voxel that I just placed in there. If I do the same thing with a putty voxel, the putty voxel distorts to meet the voxels that are already in place. So that's where putty voxels can come in handy in practical application. And an important thing to understand about putty voxels is that a putty voxel, once it's placed, at that point it does have a shape. Once you've put it in anywhere, you can't pick it up, move it around, and have it continue bending and moving its corners to meet the voxels that are nearby. So this one here was created with a putty voxel, but now that it's been planted, it does have a shape. So if I were to pick it up and copy it and paste it again beside the green voxel, it's going to move the corners of that green voxel to meet it. So it's just important to understand that once you've copy and pasted a putty voxel in, once it exists in the world, it does have a shape and it is no longer a putty voxel. So hopefully that offers some explanation on micro voxels, how they work, what they are, how they interface with other micro voxels when you put them nearby, and hopefully that explains air voxels, how they exist, and how putty voxels work. So hopefully that tutorial helps shed some light and understanding for some people. If not, let me know. I'd like to know what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong. If there's anything you'd like me to go over and cover, try and explain to you, just send me a message in game or catch me on Twitter. Just get the message to me somehow, what it is that you'd like to learn, and I'll do what I can to cover it for you.